Last Thursday morning, thousands of pensioners across the United Kingdom woke up believing their finances looked exactly the same as they did the week before. The same household bills, the same bank account, the same routine, but underneath that routine, three separate parts of retirement finances had quietly shifted. None of them arrived with flashing lights, none of them made the evening news for very long. And for most people, nothing looked urgent enough to deserve immediate attention. That's exactly why these changes catch so many retirees. They don't arrive as emergencies. They arrive as small differences. A payment that's slightly different, an energy bill that's a little higher than expected, a letter from HMRC that looks routine and gets left unopened on the kitchen table. Each change seems harmless on its own, but together, they can slowly chip away at a retirement income that already has very little room for surprises. And underneath all three sits one mistake that thousands of perfectly sensible pensioners make every year. It isn't fraud. It isn't a scam. It isn't forgetting a password. It's much simpler than that. I'll explain that mistake near the end of this video, because once you understand it, you'll look at every official letter rather differently. Before we begin, if you have your latest bank statement nearby and your most recent energy bill, take a moment to place them beside you. We'll use both before we're finished.
Good evening. I'm Arthur Bennett. Welcome to Arthur Retires UK. We explain retirement changes in plain English. No jargon and no unnecessary panic. Just practical information to help you, why it matters, and what you can do. Because retirement isn't simply about receiving your pension. It's about protecting every pound of it.
Let's begin with something that affects almost every household in Britain. Energy. Most of us don't think about our gas and electricity until the bill arrives. We switch on the kettle, turn the heating on when the weather changes, cook dinner, watch television in the evening. Life carries on, much as it always has. But here's what many retirees discover only after opening their latest bill. Your monthly cost can change even when your daily routine hasn't. That's because the amount you pay isn't determined only by how much energy you use. It's also affected by the prices you're being charged, the tariff you're on, and the standing charge applied to your account. Many people assume that if they've stayed with the same supplier for years, they're automatically on the best deal. Unfortunately, that isn't always the case, and that's why the first thing I'd encourage you to do this week is something very simple. Pick up your latest energy bill. Look at two things. First, what tariff are you currently on? Second, what standing charge are you paying each day before you've switched on a single light or boiled a kettle? You don't need to memorize the figures, you simply need to know where to find them, because understanding your bill is the first step towards understanding whether you're paying more than you need to. Some households still allow their supplier to estimate their meter readings for months at a time. Most of the time, those estimates are reasonably close. Sometimes they aren't. A genuine meter reading taken regularly gives your supplier a more accurate picture of the energy you've actually used. It also reduces the chances of receiving an unexpected adjustment later on. It's one of those small jobs that takes only a few minutes, but can save a great deal of confusion. While you have your bill in front of you, ask yourself one more question. When was the last time you actually spoke to your energy supplier? Not to complain, not because something had gone wrong, simply to check that everything on your account is still correct. For many older households, there may be additional support services available depending on individual circumstances, such as priority assistance during power interruptions or extra help for customers with certain health needs. Many people never ask, not because they don't qualify, because they don't realize the support exists, and sometimes one short telephone call answers questions you've been wondering about for months. Now, a higher energy bill is frustrating. Most of us notice it fairly quickly. The second money change is much quieter because it involves money that many retirees assume will simply arrive automatically every year. For some people, it will. For others, the rules are not quite as straightforward as they first appear, and understanding those rules could save you from a very unpleasant surprise later. Let's look at that next. Now, let's move from your energy bill to something that matters just as much. Money that arrives only once a year, For many retirees, it's become part of the rhythm of later life. It arrives, helps with the heating, and then disappears into the ordinary cost of getting through another British winter. I'm talking about the winter fuel payment. Now, before we go any further, this is where many people become confused, not because the rules are impossible to understand, because the rules have changed more than once over recent years. Many pensioners are still working from information they heard months or even years ago. That's understandable. Retirement shouldn't require you to keep up with every government announcement, but it does mean it's worth checking what the current rules are rather than relying on what someone told you over a cup of tea. One of the biggest financial mistakes I see isn't claiming the wrong benefit. It's assuming that nothing has changed. Retirement rules don't stand still. Eligibility criteria, income thresholds, payment arrangements, they can all change over time. Sometimes only slightly, sometimes quite significantly. And when that happens, many perfectly sensible people continue planning their finances using yesterday's information. That's where confusion begins. Imagine two neighbors, both retired, both receiving the state pension, both living only a few streets apart. One receives a payment they expected, the other doesn't. They compare notes over the garden fence. Almost immediately, one concludes there must have been a mistake. Perhaps, but perhaps not. The reason could simply be that their circumstances are different. One household may have additional taxable income. Another may qualify for different support. One person may receive pension credit. Another may not. That's why comparing yourself with someone else rarely tells the whole story. Retirement is personal. The rules apply to individuals, not to rumors. Instead of asking, what happened to my neighbor, ask something much more useful. What applies to my own circumstances today? That one question changes everything, because once you understand your own position, you stop worrying about everyone else's. One of the challenges with retirement is that information travels surprisingly quickly. Unfortunately, out-of-date information travels even faster. A newspaper headline from last year, a social media post, a conversation in the supermarket, advice from someone who means well. None of those tells you whether the information still applies today. That's why official guidance matters, not because it's exciting, because it's accurate, whenever an important payment or entitlement is discussed publicly. Take 5 minutes to check the latest position for yourself. That small habit can prevent a great deal of unnecessary worry. Whenever you hear that something has changed, perhaps a benefit, perhaps a tax rule, perhaps an annual payment, follow 3 simple steps. First, find out exactly what has changed, not what somebody says has changed, what has actually changed. Second, ask whether it applies to your circumstances. Many announcements affect only a particular group of people. Others affect almost everyone. Knowing which group you fall into is far more important than the headline itself. Third, if you're still unsure, ask. There is absolutely no embarrassment in asking a question before making an assumption. In fact, it's usually the wisest financial decision you can make. Now, here's something that often surprises people. Some retirement payments don't exist in complete isolation, depending on your individual circumstances. One entitlement can sometimes affect another. That's why understanding your overall financial picture is so much more valuable than checking each payment separately. Think of retirement finances as a jigsaw puzzle. Each piece matters, but you only see the full picture when all the pieces fit together. And that's exactly why I encouraged you at the beginning of this video to have your bank statement nearby. Because before this evening is over, I'd like you to compare it with something else that many retirees rarely look at. Not because it's difficult, because nobody has ever suggested doing it. Can I share one observation? Over the years, I've spoken with many retirees who are extremely careful with their spending. They switched off lights, compared supermarket prices, looked for discounts, avoided unnecessary purchases, yet some of those same people had never spent 10 minutes checking whether every payment arriving in their bank account was actually correct. That isn't carelessness, it's human nature. We pay close attention to the money leaving our account. Sometimes we pay much less attention to the money arriving. And that brings us to the third money change. In my experience, a letter that many people open, read halfway through, and quietly place in a drawer with the intention of looking at it later. Unfortunately, later has a habit of becoming much later, and that's exactly where the next misunderstanding begins. Now, we've looked at the cost of running your home. We've talked about checking whether important payments still apply to your own circumstances. The third change is quieter than either of those. In fact, many people don't discover it until a brown envelope drops through the letterbox, and by then, they're often worried before they've even opened it. I'm talking about income tax. Now, if you've been retired for many years, you may be thinking, Arthur, I've never paid tax on my state pension. Or perhaps, my pension isn't large enough for the taxman to be interested. Those are perfectly understandable thoughts, but retirement finances have been changing gradually over the last few years, not because the government suddenly decided to tax pensioners, but because two separate parts of the system have been moving in different directions. One has been increasing, the other has stayed largely the same. Eventually, those two lines begin to meet, and that's where many retirees receive an unexpected surprise. Let's keep this as simple as possible. Every taxpayer has a personal allowance. That's the amount of income you can usually receive before income tax becomes payable. At the same time, the state pension has increased over recent years. For many retirees, that's welcome news. Higher pension payments help with rising living costs, but here's what many people don't realize. The state pension is still taxable income. The tax simply isn't deducted before it's paid to you. Instead, HMRC looks at your total taxable income. That could include your state pension, a workplace pension, a private pension, earnings if you still work part-time, or taxable savings income. It's the total picture that matters, not just one payment, every year. Some retirees receive a letter from HMRC and immediately assume something has gone terribly wrong. Perhaps you've seen one yourself. Perhaps someone in your family. Anxiety takes over. The letter arrives. The HMRC logo sits across the top. Before reading a single paragraph, have I done something wrong? Do I owe hundreds of pounds? Are they reducing my pension? Most of the time, the answer is no. Often, HMRC is simply explaining how tax has been calculated using information already held about your income. That doesn't automatically mean the calculation is correct, but it does mean it deserves to be read carefully before jumping to conclusions. If you ever receive a tax letter, here's exactly what I'd do. Not next week, the same day. Make a cup of tea, sit somewhere quiet, and gather 4 things: your latest state pension notification, your workplace or private pension statement, your latest bank statement, and the HMRC letter itself. Now compare them. Don't look only at the final figure. Look at the income being used. Ask yourself, does this match the pensions I'm actually receiving? Is there any income listed that doesn't look familiar? Have my circumstances changed since HMRC last updated my record? Sometimes you'll discover everything is perfectly accurate. Other times, you'll spot something that simply needs explaining. Either way, you'll replace uncertainty with facts, and facts are always less frightening than assumptions. There's another reason it's worth reading every tax letter carefully. Some tax allowances and reliefs depend on your individual circumstances. For example, certain married couples or civil partners may qualify for tax reliefs that reduce the amount of income tax they pay if they meet the relevant conditions. Not everyone qualifies, but many people never even ask the question. Again, this isn't about assuming you're entitled, it's about checking, because retirement planning isn't just about reducing unnecessary spending. Sometimes it's about making sure you're not paying more tax than the rules actually require. Now, we've talked about your household bills, we've talked about annual payments, we've talked about tax, but none of those is the biggest risk. There's one mistake that quietly sits underneath all 3. It's made by honest people, careful people, people who've worked hard all their lives. and it has absolutely nothing to do with forgetting to pay a bill. In fact, most people don't even realize they're making it. That one mistake can interrupt important payments, create unnecessary worry, and take weeks or sometimes longer to put right. And let's finish with that, because once you understand it, you'll never look at your retirement paperwork in quite the same way again. Now, let's come back to the promise I made at the very beginning. I said there was one quiet mistake sitting underneath all three money changes. It isn't your energy supplier. It isn't HMRC. It isn't the Department for Work and Pensions. It's something much more ordinary than that. It's assuming the system already knows what's changed in your life. That assumption catches thousands of honest pensioners every year, not because they've done anything dishonest, not because they've tried to claim money they weren't entitled to, but because they genuinely believed someone else would already know. Unfortunately, government departments don't automatically know everything that changes in your life. Many retirement payments depend on the information they hold about you. If that information changes, sometimes they need you to tell them. And that's the part many people don't realize until it's too late. Think about the ordinary things that happen during retirement. Perhaps your husband or wife sadly passes away. Perhaps you move house to be closer to your children. Perhaps you begin receiving a workplace pension. Perhaps you receive an inheritance. Perhaps your savings increase. Perhaps you spend several weeks abroad visiting family. None of those things sounds unusual. They're simply part of life. But depending on which payments you receive, some changes may affect your entitlement or require the relevant department to update your record. That doesn't automatically mean your payments will stop. In many cases, nothing changes at all. But if the information needs updating, it's always better to deal with it sooner rather than later. One of the questions I'm asked most often is, Arthur, what happens if I forget to tell them? The answer depends entirely on the circumstances. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes a payment has to be reviewed. Sometimes, if you've received money that you're no longer entitled to under the rules, it may have to be repaid. That's why ignoring a change rarely makes life easier. It usually makes the conversation longer when it eventually happens. A simple telephone call today is almost always easier than explaining 12 months of changes later. I've followed the same rule for years. Whenever something important changes, I ask myself one question. Does anyone who pays me need to know about this? If the answer might be yes, I don't guess. I don't rely on something I read online. I contact the organization directly. 5 minutes on the telephone can prevent weeks of uncertainty later. So, what have we learned today? First, household costs don't stay still, even if your daily routine hasn't changed. The amount you pay can. That's why checking your bills occasionally is time well spent. Second, never assume that last year's rules are still today's rules. Payments, allowances, eligibility, they can all change over time. The safest approach is always to check the latest official guidance rather than relying on old information. Third, don't fear official letters. Read them, understand them, ask questions if you need to. A brown envelope isn't a reason to panic. It's simply information waiting to be understood. And finally, remember the mistake behind all three. Don't assume someone else already knows what's changed in your life. When in doubt, ask. When something changes, tell the right organization. Retirement becomes much less stressful when information stays up to date. Before we finish, may I leave you with one small habit? Choose one morning every month, perhaps the first Monday. Make yourself a cup of tea, sit down somewhere quiet, and spend just 20 minutes checking 5 things. Your latest pension payment, your bank statement, your most recent energy bill, any letters you've received from HMRC or the DWP. Check whether anything important has changed in your circumstances. That's it. No spreadsheets, no complicated calculations, no financial degree required, just 20 calm minutes once a month, because retirement isn't about watching your money every day. It's about paying attention often enough that small problems never have the chance to become large ones. Over the years, I've learned something about retirement. The people who enjoy it most aren't always those with the biggest pensions. They're the people who understand how their finances work. They ask questions, they stay informed, they deal with small issues before they become bigger ones. And most importantly, they never let uncertainty make decisions on their behalf. If today's video has encouraged you to spend just 20 minutes checking your own finances this week, then we've used our time together well.
Thank you for joining me here on Arthur Retires. Each week, will the real changes affecting UK pensioners in plain English, so you can make informed decisions with confidence. Until next time, I'm Arthur Bennett. Take care of yourself. Take care of the people you love. Goodbye.